I'd like to call up not only the three individuals in the next panel, but also three individuals from the panel after that, simply because they have to catch a plane. So we're going to try to expedite a couple presentations here. That would be Rubin Lopez. Well, let me see. The first panel is Mary Bergen, President, CFT. Soon Kenmotsu from the CTA.
Close.
And Kevin Gordon from CSBA. And then I'd like to also call up Rubin Lopez from the Marino Valley Unified School District. Gayle Cloud, President of Citizens United for Education. And Don Smith, a teacher in the Riverside School District. And Leslie Schwarze. And Leslie Schwarze, a parent from Marin County.
Rubin Lopez, California Association.
Who has to catch a plane first here?
Let him go. You have a plane?
Okay, we're gonna go with the parents first here. First, let's go with Leslie Schwarze.
No, I don't have to catch a plane.
You don't have to catch a plane? Okay.
I'm Rubin Lopez, California Association of School Psychologists.
Okay.
If I may go first.
I don't know who you're talking about, so you gotta tell me.
Just as a follow-up, is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
As a follow-up to the professors who teach or train the teachers to teach reading, one of the comments that was made at the hearing today is by several people is the fact that teachers are now admitting in the schools that they were never taught how to teach reading. One of the recommendations I would make on this is, as other people have mentioned, is the idea of avoiding what I might describe as quickie programs or workshops to train teachers. As your ABC legislation supports, teacher training should consist of learning how to use effective instructional materials.
The only one listed as a parent doesn't have to catch it.
What's critical in this regard is what is likely to happen out there is for there to be workshops or there to be training based on concepts. For example, the use of balanced approach. The resource specialists and others that I'm working with right now are already using the terms, and when you distill it down, it's whole language. I mean, just yesterday I had that experience where I'm concerned about phonics and the importance about skills development with kids who have been failing for years, and I hear them use the terminology balanced integrated approach, and what it distills down to is whole language. So one of the things should be very much assiduously avoided is this idea of using terms and concepts as a basis and foundation for training. And instead, it will be important that materials, tried and tested materials, be used. One of the explanations I see for why California really became immersed in the whole idea of whole language is the dependence on chic terms, as I describe it. And one of the things that you need to avoid about the adoption of the textbooks that's happening very soon is the idea that the authors and the publishers are interested in doing perhaps other things, but to sell their wares to California. And they're immediately, they have already heard the lingo, like phonics and phonemic awareness, and they're going to tell you they're good at that. And the committees that are going to review those materials are going to give points for those kinds of things. And the one thing that they're going to miss is the idea that Dr. Doug Carnine brought up, and the idea of those materials having been validated. This whole process is much too rapid, and you can't expect that there's going to be validation of the big publishing companies of their materials. You need to look carefully at that process. One of the other things that's critical about bringing everyone up to speed is the idea of that we need to avoid even the concept of reforms. We need to slow down Californians and educators, and we need to get back to critical thinking. The idea of critical consumerism has to be held by university professors all the way down to classroom teachers. There wasn't a critical sense of what was going on. There was more this group speak about, I want to be in, I want to be the person who's a part of what's popular. this idea of getting back to database judgments is very critical. And one of the things that has disturbed me is the idea of the disparaging of tests. We spent millions of dollars on class. And the reason for that is the disparaging of objective measures, criteria for evaluating what was happening in the classroom and in the progress with students. So the experience you could get now if you go out to the classroom is you can ask...
You mean you don't think we should grade for feelings? What's wrong with you? You don't think we should grade for feelings and attitudes? What's wrong with you?
It's not a bad idea, now that you mention it. You're going to be disappointed if you ask teachers how a student is reading, because I don't care what the background is, there's going to be a bit of stammering there. So the idea of the importance of tests is critical, because if you're going to get feedback, there's no database loop that we're talking about. There's not a common source of information that we all say, this is what we need. So in regard to what you're doing with identifying standard instruments is critical for getting this thing back on track. What needs to happen to counteract mantras that served as a basis of whole language and whole language is to get back to a scientific frame of mind by educators from Sacramento to the classroom teachers. What we are still getting from program reviewers, consultants, university professors, and district office administrators is jargon and abstractions. You know why classroom teachers and principals adhere to whole language? Because what happens is they're taken hostage. When the program reviewers go around, the coordinated compliance reviews, they are speaking the jargon that is popular. That's what happens. They literally take districts hostage. Now, there is a waiver potential, but they're program reviewers, for example, by saying when they come in, they're going to ask you, are you talking the party line? When I participate in this program reviews, there are terms. It's like almost they got a list of the terms that they're checking off to see whether or not you meet muster. One thing I would really caution you on is, once again, even phonemic awareness and cueing systems are meaningless unless they have a direct connection with specific programs. The one example you could find, if you don't believe it, is the importance of well-designed materials is demonstrated by many poorly funded private schools that have taught reading well because they have relied on structured curricular programs and not on popular philosophies. Basing beginning reading instruction on something other than an effective reading program puts California's children at the mercy of individual teacher ingenuity. The idea with whole language is that teachers were basically going to design curriculum. This was unfair to teachers because it expects them to do one more thing with the already inordinate number of things we expect them to do. In closing, let me give you brief comments about what I would recommend. Number one, relying on validated materials and instructional practices to teach reading. One of the things you said is what hasn't been talked about here that cuts across the curriculum is the idea of pedagogy or teaching methodologies. The teaching methodologies that were learned in whole language are now being applied to mathematics and are being applied. The idea of hands-on, the idea of discovery methods, those cut across the curriculum. So it gets beyond the idea of even just the concepts or what you're going to teach, but how are you going to teach it? An important thing for you is if it would be possible to require program reviewers, consultants to stop propagating abstract philosophies or jargon or untested projects. Because if you look around, untested projects are the things that get pushed here in Sacramento. Look at reading recovery, how that came down the pike, and perhaps some of you bought into it, and you'll see the dynamic of what happens about how a pet project or somebody heard from somebody else, and then it's throughout the state. Regarding the state frameworks, what we need is a framework that encourages critical thinking, critical consumerism, not abstract ideas. If they tell you there's one test or one assessment practices that serves all purposes, they're not telling you the truth. Portfolio is not the only thing. Now, when you go to bed tonight, think this one thing, and I would recommend it to you. Curriculum and instruction practices should be considered the source of educational effectiveness. That is critical, more critical than even the people you got there. Again, look at private schools. Poorly funded many times, not even necessarily credentialed, that use structured programs. So the point, and I'll close with this, effective curriculum instructional practices are again the source of educational effectiveness, not psychology, not developmentalism, not social culturalism or philosophy, Unquestionably, the power of effective curriculum instruction is unparalleled in my opinion. Thank you.
Mr. Firestone.
Just briefly, have you had any experience with the Reading Recovery Program? If so, did it work?
No, I've looked at some of the, no.
Let's move on to the next presentation. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
We're leaving.
Who is, who
We're
needs?
leaving.
They're leaving.
Miss Cloud?
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
Is this on? I guess it is.
Yes, we hear you.
Hi, I'm Gayle Cloud, and I'm a parent, and I have news from the front. I've gone from cookie baker to crusader, and let me tell you my story. I've enclosed several documents for your perusal, from test scores to newspaper articles. I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who said, "Democracy depends upon a literate populace." If this is indeed true, and I believe it is, we are in grave danger as a nation. Because I have a front row view of whole language in action, I cannot overstate the current and long-term effects of this highly lauded but phenomenally unproven program. Because of my experience, I have become empowered. That's educat jargon. I've become empowered to stand up and yell, "The emperor is naked." I hopefully here today you're listening. If you cannot guess, I feel very passionately about this subject because of what has happened to my children and their peers, and my first instinct is to castigate those responsible. I want you to put faces to this. I've got cute little twin boys. They're the victims of whole language, as are thousands and millions of other children. My second and probably more healing instinct is to use reason, something whole language devotees have lacked. We dissenters have been labeled, maligned, and scorned in our district and in hundreds of others. And then we parents have been blamed for this fiasco because we have not read to our children. I would remind these true believers that our children are in school 6 hours a day, and if reading were a priority, they could surely teach this subject in that amount of time, regardless of deficiencies found at home. My journey through the looking glass began several years ago when my twin sons were in the 4th grade. They'd been successful in school and they read fairly well, or so I thought. They continually guessed at multisyllable words, and I realized they had no strategies for sounding out words. The truth about whole language began to sink in. My sons needed help, and so did their friends. I talked to our whole language principal, and his suggested reading was Ken Goodman's What's Whole About Whole Language. What an eye-opener. I realized whole language was not so much a reading method, but a philosophy that labeled unbelievers elitist and said little about scientific evidence. Surely, I thought, our district personnel would want to know whole language wasn't working. After collaborating, ed jargon, with other parents, we shared research and arranged to meet our board members. Their response? "I don't have time to read your research. Won't you be glad when this issue is laid to rest and you can get back to canning and playing tennis?" Well, I really would like to sew and quilt more, but this issue just hasn't gone away. After our board made it clear they weren't interested in our research, which included Jean Chall, we broached the subject with our curriculum director, our deputy superintendent, and our superintendent. Surely they would listen. Wrong again. They did not embrace our report from the field. We were labeled narrow-minded and simplistic. Slightly daunted, but not defeated, we spent hours in front of a local store collecting signatures on petitions asking for a reading program that incorporated phonics in grades K2. Our board was unmoved. We're persevering. We visited a school in Inglewood, Nancy Ishinaga's school, that used an explicit phonics program, Open Court. We felt vindicated. Her program worked, and immensely saddened for what our children had missed. It is not socioeconomic level, nor lack of a home reading program that is preventing our kids from succeeding. It is a lousy reading program. For whatever reason, our district did field test Open Court during the 94-95 school year. After this explicit phonics program proved itself to be successful, one school board member said he'd eat crow, a food that should be ingested by multitudes of educrats. Did we implement this program? Not yet. First grade teachers who field tested the program may continue its use, but the program was not expanded. The Open Court students will be tested in third grade again without having had the full program. We were told Open Court was too expensive to implement, yet we use Reading Recovery, a whole language remediation program which involves one-on-one tutoring, thousands of dollars, and has little scientific research as shown by the Battelle study that it is effective in the long term. Even though the research supports what we parents have known for years, districts and teachers, colleges are loath to change. The whole language philosophy has invaded other disciplines, and we now have new math, integrated science, and revisionist history. These will fail too because they lack academic rigor. Let's ensure a program's track record before we again bring wholesale disaster into the classroom. Let's look at the evidence, and let's do what's right for kids.
Thank you, Ms. Cloud. Who's the other person who has an urgent plane flight? Okay. You have an urgent plane flight?
Yes.
Okay.
Missed one already.
Alrighty, go ahead.
Okay.
You are?
My name is Patty Abarca, and I am an elementary bilingual school teacher. I have taught in a large urban school district for over 21 years. I'm also the parent of two children who attend public elementary school. I'm here to talk about some things that are going in Los Angeles County schools. I know that some of you on this committee do not believe in bilingual education. I do, and I know that it works, if it is done properly. I used to be able to transition students from Spanish reading to English reading in second grade, or at least in third grade, when the children were taught systematic explicit phonics in kindergarten and first grade. Whether one teaches in Spanish or in English, the children must learn to decode. The children need to learn to write using grammatical rules, correctly spelling words, and simply learning the correct formation of the letters. All of these skills need to be taught by the teachers in a systematic way, and the students must then practice what they have been taught. However, teachers are still being told not to teach systematic explicit phonics. We are told to teach phonics, decoding skills, grammar, spelling, and handwriting in context. And context means when you happen to come across something in material that is not designed to teach anything systematically. In addition, we have not had...
Is this both language? Is this in Spanish as well?
Yes. Isn't it bizarre? Yes.
So you're teaching whole language?
Whole language in Spanish, yes. In addition, we have not had spelling, grammar, or handwriting books for many years. More than a third of the teaching staff at my school has never been trained in teaching systematic explicit phonics, systematic spelling, nor systematic skill instruction. During this school year, the 45 teachers in my school have had 3 professional development days. For 2 of those days, in August and in January, the Los Angeles County Office of Education, at the request of my school, sent representatives from the California Writing Project and the California Literature Project. We were not in-serviced on how to teach systematic explicit phonics, nor anything to do with systematic skill instruction. It was more of the same whole language methodology.
Excuse me, those 2 projects, California Reading Project, California Literacy Projects.
California Writing Project and the California Literature Project.
And who oversees those 2?
You guys do.
You,
Us, the Department of Education,
yes.
University of California.
the CSU. And those are pro-whole language projects? Okay, thank you.
In fact, my group was told by the trainers in the August in-service that changes were coming in the teaching of language, changes in the teaching of language arts were coming, but that they, the trainers, knew what was best, and they would continue doing what they had been doing. Within the last 2 weeks, my principal stated during 2 meetings and in writing that phonics needs to be integrated throughout the day in science, social studies, and literature. He said, quote, "This is nothing new. There are, or there should be, many opportunities throughout the day for a child to use letter-sound relationships in meaningful context. It is all part of a balanced approach to teaching reading," end quote. He is correct that teaching phonics in context is nothing new. It is what the whole language zealots have been saying for the past 10 years, minimizing the importance of phonics in learning how to read to a mere nod of the head. Teaching phonics in context is not systematic explicit phonics. It is implicit and incidental phonics, and it does not work. In addition, there is a marked trend to misrepresent the term balanced approach. Many Los Angeles County schools, including mine, are being trained in a state Department of Education program called REACH, out of the Los Angeles County Office of Education. A group from my school participated in 2 full-day conferences. Have you read the REACH materials?
Yes, it's a whole language program
Yes.
that we fund.
And the description of the exemplary working schools. The methods being suggested are called a balanced approach. However, it's about 90% whole language, reading recovery, and predictable books instead of decodable books. And there is a bone thrown to those of us who believe in teaching the children how to read and write. One teacher who attended these conference days tried to reassure me that phonics was indeed addressed by the trainer. I was told that he said that he didn't want to get into the phonics versus whole language debate, but that phonics needed to be taught 15 minutes per day. Give me a break. As for spelling in my school, that really has not been addressed since last school year, when the staff received a weekly bulletin from the principal and our previous assistant principal that stated, quote, "Spelling is best taught through writing as a process. This means that the traditional same list of words for all on Monday, the pretest, numerous exercises, and a Friday final test are considered inappropriate practices," end quote. In that same weekly bulletin, we were told also that our students were not to read aloud because, quote, "It is a deadly practice that embarrasses the poor reader, bores the good reader, and has limited to no learning value. Regular read-aloud sessions in which the teacher reads to students are indispensable in keeping focus on reading for meaning. Because the teacher does the code breaking, reading aloud gives all the students in the class, even those with poor reading skills, the opportunity to enjoy literature," end quote. My question to this unbelievable philosophy is, when will the children ever learn to break the code themselves? Is my school an aberration? No. Teachers everywhere laughingly call phonics the F word because of, it's true, because of the bad connotation that the whole language zealots have placed on it. But unlike the new teachers, veteran classroom teachers have experienced many swings of the educational pendulum. We knew that it was not in the best interest of the child to blindly follow a single extreme method. I hasten to add that I am not a phonics-only teacher. I have always had a love of literature and have always imparted that love to my students. I have always had an abundant classroom library, paid for by me, by the way, and have always read stories to my students. I simply believe that it is imperative to teach the children how to read and how to write so that they will always have the tools to appreciate what they read and to be able to competently author anything. Teaching systematic, explicit phonics should be the rule, but it is not. Phonics as you trip over it, otherwise known as phonics taught in context, is still the standard. The same is true for spelling, grammar, and handwriting. Many of us cheered with the Reading Task Force report and the passage of the ABC bills, but those values are being twisted and misrepresented. How will the schools change if those who are in charge of teacher training are not changing and are still training thousands of teachers, administrators, and parents in what they call a balanced approach? This so-called balanced approach continues to advocate 90% whole language techniques and philosophy, and just a token gesture is given to those of us who believe in systematically teaching the children the lifelong skills of decoding, spelling, grammar, and handwriting. Please help us.
Thank you. I have a quick question here.
Yes,
You're one of the few people here today who has testified, who has a bilingual background,
yes.
and is an advocate of phonics. Would it be accurate to state that using phonics helps the transition from a child's native tongue to English fluency quicker, and that the reason why we're transitioning kids, we're taking 5, 6, 7, 8 years to transition kids in some bilingual programs is because the whole language may delay that transition? Is there a connection between reading methodology and length of time that we make the transition?
About 10 years ago was when I first started hearing about whole language, and I personally thought it was a racist plot against the Hispanic child. I really did. I didn't realize that it was up and down the state, and it was being imposed also on the white children. I taught first grade for 6 years. I taught it phonetically because it only makes sense to teach it. It's a beautiful language. It's phonetic. You teach it in syllables. You connect the syllables together. The children can decode whatever word you put in front of them. Finally, about 8 years ago, I graduated to 2nd grade, and I took many of those children with me. Because I am a bilingual teacher, I would send my English readers to another teacher who happened to be a whole language person, and I took her Spanish readers. In 2nd grade, mid-year, my top Spanish readers were opening books, 2nd grade books in English, and reading beautifully. It is the truth. Whole language has done more to harm bilingual education than I don't know what. The children can read, especially in Spanish, and they will make that transition from Spanish into English if they are taught.
Okay. Mr. Murray?
Now, it would appear in your school, some teachers, like yourself, use phonics, and other teachers do not use phonics.
The problem is that mainly in kindergarten and 1st grade, where it really should be emphasized, they're not doing that anymore. And I am now in 3rd grade. And when they come to 3rd grade, hopefully they've already had phonics, and the materials in 3rd grade that are at grade level do not teach those beginning phonics sound. So if I want to go back and teach phonics from the beginning, then
Well,
I
let's
have
say
to go
when
back.
when you were in the 1st grade,
Yes, I taught using phonics books.
there was more than one 1st grade class in your school?
Oh, yes. We're a school of about 1,200 children. We're year-round and...
How many 1st grade classes?
At least 6 to 8.
Okay. The other teachers did not teach.
Some did and some did not.
Okay. There are tests given that could be broken down to the class level. Are there not, like Cat E or some of those?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Tests, standardized tests.
Sure, we give CTBS. Actually, back then, we gave CTBS Espanol. Now we give the Apprenda test.
Okay, so that you could make a comparison among the classes, 1st grade classes, could you not?
When you look at the results of the Apprenda test, the children who are in the bilingual program are doing much better than the children who are in the English-only program, yes.
No, I want to contrast phonics instruction with whole language instruction. You could compare the different classes, could you not?
Probably, sure.
You don't know?
Just as studies were done in Houston, where they compared those classes.
No, those were not tests of all the children. That was a specialized research project. But here you have all of the children there taking the test. So, but you're not aware of the results of the test among them? Okay.
No. We had no comparison of teachers who were teaching whole language versus teachers who were teaching phonics.
I bet you someone did, and they could easily see the results.
Possibly.
Okay. Any other questions? We have another parent who needs to catch a plane over here. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Is this on? Well, it says that I'm a teacher. I am a teacher in a neighboring district, but I'm primarily a parent from Riverside. My third child was in a highly commended whole language classroom. He was GATE certified. He had 2 educated parents who read to him daily and provided him with a multitude of experiences and a small fortune in books. I wanted to know why he didn't learn how to read. So with no answers forthcoming from the district, I went to Cal State University and became a teacher just to find out. What exactly was whole language? Well, I was very recently credentialed, and I have one of my current texts to explain to you what whole language was as it was presented to me. Whole language is not a method, nor are there any essential whole language methods. Some methods are easily made congruent with a whole language perspective. However, none of these is essential. A classroom in which children spend the whole year raising chickens and selling the eggs, including writing statements to persuade school board members that such a curriculum would be beneficial, could well be a whole language classroom. So could a classroom that emphasized science projects and excluded literature. So could one in which children never wrote personal narratives, but attended exclusively to art and drama. Or, get this, one where teacher and students together spent the year investigating and acting on a political issue in the community. Here's another description. It is the teacher's belief that gives meaning to the method. Some materials and activities, however, simply do not fit a whole language view. For example, activities that fragment language or materials written for the instruction of separate reading or material subskills, phonics in other words, conflict with whole language beliefs by definition. If they are used as the teacher's manual suggests, even the most holistic phonics materials and basal series all entail simulations, not real reading. Thus, the basic whole language belief, acquisition through use, is violated. The only way a basal reader technology or a phonics program could fit into a whole language classroom would be for children to use them as data, for example, as documents in social studies projects on the history of changes in school reading materials and how they reflect wider societal changes. So,
What book is that now?
this was taken from Whole Language, What's the Difference? And one of the authors is a current professor at California State University in San Bernardino.
Is that book a commonplace in Riverside
Yes, it's
schools?
a required reading text for teacher training programs at Cal State University. It was
That's
one of
a
my
required
books.
text for teacher training programs at
Right.
the Cal State University level.
Right. So after that, I determined that this whole language is purposefully amorphous. It's a concept that accepts no blame when children fail, because getting the words is not the point. The point is just to experience literature and appreciate it. Whether or not they learn to read is not the end goal. Even if you appreciate some of the tenets of whole language, there is a huge gap, really huge gap between the theory outlined in this book and actual practice that you see in classrooms. While I was student teaching, my master teacher explained to me the lack of an alphabet in her classroom by stating, children do not need to know the alphabet to learn to read. This was just last year, by the way. They were supposed to discover alphabetic principles while reading and writing, even though they could do neither. As a new teacher, I became anesthetized. I was expected to just digest this whole language rhetoric and then regurgitate it on demand, despite what I knew. And you know what? I started to do it because of that false sense of professionalism that you get, and it was really frightening. And I'll tell you something else. In this school, they were implementing a new experimental program of whole language based on the reading recovery model. It is highly expensive, and they are currently using it as the literacy training program throughout my entire district of 26 elementary schools. So I have been a substitute teacher, and I've student taught in other grade levels, and I'll tell you there's a heightened call for experiential, hands-on learning. And folks, that's the only kind there is when you don't know how to read. Well, it's true. I think that one of my primary concerns is that the student education programs will be extremely loath to change without a clear direction from the CTC. I had professors who used their positions to castigate phonics proponents. Credentialed teachers from CSU don't have the foggiest idea how to teach phonics. And in light of the current research, I am worried that they're going to be using the word explicit phonics and will redefine it as the embedded program, which was described earlier by Dr. Foreman. So I appreciate your validating my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, let's have Mary Bergen, please.
I'm Mary Bergen. I'm president of the California Federation of Teachers and vice president of the American Federation of Teachers. Attached to the statement that I gave you is our summer edition of our American Educator. You really should have received this before, and maybe some of you may have read through. I hope that.
I just wanted to commend you real quickly. That is one of the best collection of articles on the reading issue I've ever read, and I have sent copies of that issue all around this whole state to people as the best summary of the reading issue available. So I wanted to commend you. I don't know who put that together, but that's an excellent job.
Well, the American Educator is really kind of a two-person operation back in Washington, but the AFT is very committed to high standards, and we also look for high standards in the research. And essentially, what is in here is a synthesis of much of the research that you've been hearing about today. That's got us, and that led, or certainly created a background for the Reading Task Force's report. I think that task force does give us a path to follow, but I am worried, as Doug Carnine is, about, well, let's not just leave here and think everything's going to go smoothly. So I just wanted to look at a couple of the obstacles that I see in terms of full implementation. The first is the perception in the field, particularly by those of us who've been teaching a while, that we're just back to another swing of the pendulum, and that this pendulum is just taking us back to worksheets and stultifying texts of the past. And I think we have to really acknowledge that many teachers and school administrators are strong and sincere in their belief that whole language is a valid strategy, and that we need to work to overcome that. I think that can partially be done by making sure that everything that goes out stresses the definition of balance. And after listening to some of this today, I think we probably have to get away from that term, because balance, I think, as it is defined in the task force report, and actually in the research, is being used as an excuse not to change, or to change only superficially. So unfortunately, we're probably going to have to abandon that term. I liked Mrs. Thompson's, the principal from Inglewood. In fact, if she was on tape, I hope you all pull that out, because I thought she gave a very good definition of integration with phonemic awareness, phonics, et cetera, really at the core of what we're teaching, but also including literature, spelling, grammar. As an English teacher, I was just thrilled to hear somebody use the term grammar. And above all, though I don't want us, we have to avoid making this into a political battle of an us and them. We're really all in this together. Perhaps the most difficult obstacle we have really is the lack of professional preparation for this balanced approach, integrated approach, whatever we end up calling it, and particularly preparation for articulated skills development. It really has not been a part of the higher ed programs for the last several years, except for the exceptions such as Dr. Scheffelbein showed himself to be. Not only don't we have the teachers, I mean, I just don't really think we have enough teachers for the teachers. We have to understand that we are talking really about difficult subject matter. That it isn't something that just gives itself to a brief workshop now and again, or God knows, to just an additional few hours tacked into what is really a very crowded pre-service curriculum. You have undoubtedly listened to our representatives here come up and testify against various good ideas of things that ought to be included in the curriculum for pre-service. It's not because they aren't good ideas, it's just that, as someone said, where in the world do you put it? It's already too big. And at the same time, not extensive enough. I also know that there isn't enough time in any district's in-service program, although maybe a few, from what I heard today again, to cover the necessary material in a way that teachers end up feeling confident in using it. And of course, we don't build into the instructional day really time for collaboration among teachers. The CFT has long espoused a 2-year pre-service preparation program, not a 1-year program, that would give us both more coursework and more clinical experience, and as well as significant support and mentoring for beginning teachers. You just can't throw someone into the classroom, say, close the door and go to it. And actually teaching is one of those things for which experience counts, and so does additional preparation. I think that trying to implement the task force report gives a new urgency, at least for us, to this proposal. And I think we probably also need to revisit the professed goal established long ago in California of every teacher a reading teacher. I think we're going to have to get ourselves a little focused here first. But as we look long-term and short-term, I think we do need to establish, are we talking about professional preparation for K-3 teachers, for elementary school teachers, for all teachers, and how would those differ? And what are long and short-term goals? And finally, are we prepared to commit the time and the resources necessary to meet those goals? We want to do everything tomorrow, and yet we know that we don't have things in place to do it, and we need to be out there looking for the resources and the time. I see this as a challenge for policymakers and educational professionals alike. So when I talk about we, I do mean all of us. I think we are all in this together, and the future of our children does depend on it. And finally, whatever we do, in terms of new materials that are adopted, in terms of new approaches to reading instruction, we need to be continually examining them and looking at them. We shouldn't be we shouldn't have had to wait for a NAEP test to tell us we were in trouble. We need to establish a way of looking at things both at the classroom level, at the school level, and at the district level, as well as the state level, so we don't need a big wake-up call, that we can, in fact, look at our programs ongoing, make corrections as needed, and be big enough to be self-critical that we've made a mistake and need to change course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you need to go next?
Yeah, if I could. Is that okay?
That's okay. I know Kevin Gordon lives here in town, so he can wait for hours.
Okay. I've just got a really long drive. My name is Alexa Cortez-Cola. I'm the executive director of the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation, which is based out of San Francisco, California, and I think I'm going to kind of abandon my set testimony because I know we're trying to move quickly here. But I do have one comment, and that's on some of the general testimony here today, which is a lot of references of going back to phonics, which I think is a real misinterpretation of the research. We're really moving forward with new research and new studies into an approach to teaching reading instruction that has phonics in it, but it is in no way, I think, going back. And so I would just caution the verbiage and the couching that's been postured here today about going back to an old system, because I think that would be disregarding the research studies we've heard today, which are really moving forward in very specific ways of telling us what works in reading research, that phonics is part of it, but we know a lot more about phonics now than we did 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So that would just be a general remark I'd make about these proceedings, and a caution to this committee that we really should be forward-thinking and use progressive language, because I think we're going to need to do that to make this message clear to people in California.
Attack jargon with jargon kind of thing?
I'm with the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation, and I'm going to tell you just very quickly about our foundation and why this issue is important. Charles Schwab, who many know as an investment guru and founder of Charles Schwab and Company, is also the chairman of the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation, which is dedicated to helping families with reading disabilities. Last week in the LA Times and nationwide, there have been a lot of profile pieces on Mr. Schwab's own reading disability and his own professed current inability to read most text. And this has been a very personal issue for the Schwab family, because when their son was diagnosed with a learning and reading disability in the 2nd grade, Mr. Schwab was finally able to put a label on why he had struggled with reading all his life, and in fact never became proficient at reading. He tells a common story that he's tried to read Shogun 7 times, has never gotten through the first paragraph, but financials come very easily to him, as you can imagine. He was asked to testify here today, and I think would have loved to, except that it was such short notice. And so I'm kind of filling in for big shoes and giving his testimony and his story, which I think is very poignant. But even more poignant, I think, is the struggle that the Schwabs have gone through as a family to get help for their son with reading disabilities, who's now a college-age student. When they first went to the school and detected that there was a problem with their son, they were told that it was a lag and that he would catch up. And they decided not to accept that. And for 3 years, this very well-off and well-educated family tried to get answers and found that the school was the most ill-equipped place to provide the answers for them. Not that the school was being deceptive, but simply didn't have the resources, the tools, or the information, and certainly not the research. And so they went to experts and they flew to private schools, and their son continues to struggle and fall behind. And out of that, when they decided to start a foundation, they decided to pour all of their financial resources and charitable work into helping families with similar problems. And to that end, the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation operates a very unique resource center that serves, well, it used to start out serving the Bay Area community. It now serves all of California, and it's called the Parents Educational Resource Center. The Schwab Foundation is the sole funder of the $1.3 million budget of that center, and the center's sole purpose is to help families who find themselves caught in the middle of all these debates and need resources today, because we don't really have a solution right now for them in our classrooms. And so every day our center sees parents, in fact we see 1,000 families a month, helping them get problems, helping them find resources and solutions to their children's reading problems. We operate a library in San Mateo. We field requests from all over the country. We operate an information referral database to hook parents up with tutors, assessment places, pediatricians, resources all over the state that can help them. We work with them one-on-one to help them work with their schools effectively. We advocate working with private public schools, and we hire people to consult with parents and help them get what they need out of the system. But obviously there's a huge gap here, which is the schools need to be ready to deal with these parents when they come back with the information and equipment we give them to move forward with their child. And so out of these 1,000 families a month, our center's services have grown exponentially. We're seeing 200% increases in our services every year. Last Saturday, we held a lecture. Dr. Reed Lyon was in town and did a community lecture for us. That's one of the services we provide. We bring in experts from all over the country and do community lectures and trainings. I thought, gosh, a guy coming in to talk about reading research, I wonder if the community is really going to get it. We sold out all 250 seats and turned away an additional 200 people for a Saturday morning lecture. 70% of those people were teachers. And can you imagine the teachers and parents who sat and heard Dr. Lyon's research findings and thought, gosh, the evidence is in. What is happening in our schools? Why isn't this being implemented? It's crystal clear here this morning, and nothing's being done. This fall, we'll be holding a public awareness symposium on reading problems in kids. We have 10,000 people committed to that event. Bill Rojas, superintendent of San Francisco schools, has committed all 5,500 of his teachers for a day of training. We also have the commitment of 2,000 private school teachers. 3,000 parent and community members are going to be attending a community forum, and we have 500 clinicians who will be coming. And so I think that just underscores the magnitude of the public's need to get information on this issue. There are people at the bottom who are dealing with this issue in their family life every single day, waiting for the top to catch up in policy and implementation, and something has got to be done. The Schwabs can't continue kind of running a center that obviously is going to, the capacity for what we do will indeed probably be eventually exceeded by the demand for services. And so while we're a private initiative with private funding trying to address this issue and trying to comfort and help and assist and provide resources to parents, these kids are really falling through the cracks, and these families are paying a social cost that I think we haven't even talked today. I've been very surprised that there have been no statistics today on the link to juvenile delinquency of these kids. The fact that most of kids in our juvenile halls have reading problems or are illiterate. Assemblywoman Mazzoni brought up very early today in the proceedings what is happening to these kids who didn't catch it in first and second and third grade. We're seeing them, their parents are coming into our center, and in some ways it is too late. We're trying to provide tools and resources and a lot of Kleenex boxes to get them through this very, very dreadful time in their life when they're realizing that their kids have really been left behind. So I would just offer that testimony on behalf of the Schwab Foundation, make this committee aware of what we're doing in this area. The new main library in San Francisco opened 2 weeks ago. We seeded a special collection on learning and reading in that new library. We also seeded technology geared to help kids compensate who have reading problems. And the new main library is going to be featuring a series of community lectures on this issue. And so I think the private sector is playing a critical role in this, but obviously we all need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Who gets to go next?
Okay, who's going next here?
Go next.
Okay, great.
Good evening. I'm Sue Kenmotsu. I teach learning disabled students in Lodi. I started out at 1 o'clock this morning watching you all, and I must admit, I have heard as a teacher and a member of my community many things said about the legislature. I'm sure you'll be shocked to discover people actually talk about you outside this setting, but I have great admiration for each and every one of you this evening. This has been a long time for those of us who are still waiting our turn, and those of us who are, but then also it must be even more difficult to be you all, to listen to everyone, to hear all the various kinds of testimony that people have to say, and we're all counting on you to make the right decisions. And so, since I hadn't heard anyone say other than thank you for letting them talk, I thought I'd start out with something different, and thank you for the time that you've spent listening this evening. You're not done yet, okay? There are people back there still waiting. But it is something that is so important, because everything that happens in my classroom and my colleagues' classroom is a result of a decision that's generally made in a room like this with folks like you. And so we're counting on you. Let's see, so I have printed testimony. You'll be very excited to see it. It's in big print so that I can read it, you can read it too. I'm not going to read it to you tonight, though. There are only a couple things I really wanted to emphasize. One of them was that CTA is very appreciative and happy that the class size bill was approved by your committee. It's so important to us. You may have noted some of our ads on television related to that, but it is important to be able to reach and teach our children in reading and to do systematic phonics and a direct instruction methodology of teaching reading. When you do it with 20 students, it's different than when you do it with 35. It's absolutely and completely a different world. And my colleagues who sit at lunch and fix the world over tuna fish sandwiches often say, you know, We wouldn't need special education. We wouldn't need reading recovery. We wouldn't need any extra programs. If there are only fewer of our students to deal with, we would have time to really give them the individual attention that they need. The other thing that they do, because the colleagues I work with are experienced teachers, is that we are very skeptical of anything new. So I need to warn you ahead of time that if you do your job correctly regarding the idea of direct instruction and inclusion of phonics, then it will be done in such a way that it does not appear like a sledgehammer coming down upon our teaching staffs, because that will cause people to look at it askance, as many of my colleagues looked at whole language the same way. When we were told to take the basal texts and the reading comprehension questions and to put them away, in fact, pack them in boxes and send them off, many experienced teachers quietly read their memos, went to their rooms, packed their books, and waited to see if someone would come and collect them. And when no one came to collect them, they were delighted, and they took the books out, and when the children came to class, they took them out, and they used them because they knew as experienced teachers that those were successful materials. They used phonics in their classrooms. Why? Because they always had used phonics. They found it to be a very effective tool to getting children to read in the early grades. They saw no reason to stop doing that. And we were lucky enough to be in a situation where our administrators were supportive of those practical pedagogical methodologies that worked in our classrooms. So I had to tell you that story because it is true, I'm fessing up, that there are experienced teachers out there who will look now at phonics as being the be-all, save-all of everything. If it's approached in the wrong way, then you still will not be effective in somehow managing to strike that middle tone. Instead of using the B word for balance, there must be a middle way. My mother is Buddhist, my father is Presbyterian, that makes me multi-religious. But anyway, in the Buddhist idea of the middle way is really the way that I think is going to be the most successful. CTA also wants to, I'll get back to the stuff I have to say. We believe in standards. We believe that you're going to need resources to do what we need to do. We support many of the recommendations in the Reading Task Force report. We need to warn you, however, that staff development is not always as wonderful a thing as people would like it to be. It can be presented in a very fragmented way where one day you're told you're going to do one thing, one day you're going to be told to do something else. It must be presented, any new idea must be presented with the kind of on-site support that you heard described earlier, where there are experienced people in the methodology right on campus with you who can help you out. Because teachers are really good about doing that, about helping one another out. In summation, our teachers do know how to teach. We do know how to teach, but we often lack direction in what it is we're supposed to teach, what skills we ought to be teaching. We do our level best to try and balance what we hear that we're supposed to be doing with what we know from our practical sense to be effective in our classrooms. And the rest of my testimony, I think I'm just going to leave. There are plenty of other people who have things to say. I will say, however, though, for Assemblyman Firestone, there is reading recovery on my campus. So if you want to ask me a question about it, I'll be happy to answer.
How does it work?
How does it work? It works for our first grade students. The teachers identify the ones who are the lowest performing, who are they're worried the most about. The reading recovery teacher comes in, takes that student, and runs a very exhaustive miscue, phonetic, and other and comprehension set of assessments. So they test them. They take the student, they test them, they work with them a half hour a day for approximately 30 to 60 lessons, depending on whether or not they're meeting the criteria. The teaching is very systematic. It does include, because I've observed lessons, they do take the letter S and actually say it makes this sound. Okay, hello. I remembered that you mentioned that. And for the students in my school that are able to get that attention, it has made a difference. And most of the students go back into first grade and second grade and third grade. And remember, I'm the resource specialist teacher. If something else goes wrong in the upper grades, they find me. Okay, so I can tell you that in the 3 years that we have had reading recovery full-time on our campus, that those students do not generally, I'd say about 80 to 90% of those students never come back as a referral to a student success team for me as a resource teacher. They're out in their classrooms. We could be the only school where it works, but they're doing fine in terms of their reading skills, and they are doing well and in the rest of their academic subjects. Every once in a while, and the reading recovery teachers are very good about knowing when they've hit someone who's got a genuine learning disability outside of what their scope of what their skills can do, they tend to be the ones who find me early and say, we have a truly... Well, we are a large school site. We have nearly 1,000 students, and we're a three-track multi-track year-round school. So we have a reading recovery teacher and program for each track, so that if you're on A, B, or C, you have access to reading recovery. I heard a comment also about how reading recovery kicks out anybody who won't work in reading recovery, and that's how come they do so well. I think that reference is made to something that I know is a requirement of being a participant, which is you have to come to school. If you're not going to come to school,
I think the remark was regarding the test results, the research.
About testing the students. Well, you see, you can't...
No, the research results that justifies the reading recovery.
Excluded students who weren't going to do well in it, I think,
There has been that.
Who did not do well.
Yeah.
So you've got a reading recovery teacher, one reading recovery teacher for each track.
Yes.
If they take a student out a half an hour a day, the most students that they can handle is about 10, isn't it?
No, they can take about 8 students for their 30-day period, so they could get through 24 students.
Wait a minute now, I thought they took the student out each day.
Yeah, they do.
The same student out each day.
Uh-huh.
So if they take each one of them for a half an hour, they could only handle about 10 students in a day, right? And it's the same 10 students each day.
Yes, but they don't do that for a whole year. See, 10 weeks, generally. So
they can only handle 10 students at a time for 10 weeks. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and then they get
the
a
next
different
10 weeks
10,
they get another
10. Yeah, okay.
So we
We're
do not
together.
have a whole lot of students involved in this, right?
No, and that's one of the reasons why.
Out
I
of your
said
whole
they're
school, so
expensive.
you're talking about maybe 30. We got 1,000 students, and you can handle 30 with this program.
Yep, that's how they do it.
Ms. Mazzoni?
There have been a number of things raised today, and one of the things that I'm really interested in is the whole issue of the staff development, the preparation at our institutions that train teachers, and how we get at that, and what's the best way to do it. One of the things that I found, there were a couple comments that I found disturbing. One was said earlier that teachers don't read research. I don't believe that. I don't believe that all teachers read research, but I cannot believe that. And if they don't, I wonder why, because these are people who have had a lot of education and are professionals and should be basing what they do on research. The other thing that I'm concerned about, that I want to probe a little bit, is this issue that, well, teachers will reject, or there may be a tendency to reject phonics now if the hammer comes down too heavily. Now, it seems to me that if teachers are professional and they're trained in academia, and they read the research, why would they resist it if it's the appropriate thing to do and if they are professional? And why do they need to be treated with kid gloves on this issue? Number one. And the other thing is, do we, in terms of the staff development, do we say to teachers, go out and find your own staff development, we'll fund you, but you go out and find the best program for yourself that creates, and we expect you as a professional to take care of that? Or do we put the onus on the school district to provide that staff development, and maybe a way that is not the best, that is not the best method? Do you see what I'm saying? I struggle with this all the time, about teachers being professional and somehow abdicating their responsibility in some of these areas. The teachers should be saying, wait a second, this whole language doesn't make sense. We're experienced in the classroom. We know what makes sense in the classroom. We know how children learn. We know how children learn to read. What is going on in our system that creates a situation in which, if we don't, as you say, if we come down too heavily on them, they're going to go, no, we don't want to do phonics, when in fact, they should be the ones that are saying,
let me Let me take that part first about the hammer. To clarify my point, when administrators were coming to the classrooms and saying, whole language is it, turn in your textbooks, turn in the books that you know are working, turn in your phonics materials, experienced teachers resisted doing that because it didn't make sense to their empirical sense of what were good materials. So I said, and maybe others had said it better than I did earlier in the day, that the approach to introducing phonics and direct instruction, or whatever it is that you decide is the absolute best thing for us to do, should be done in such a way that it doesn't carry the same kind, that it is balanced with what makes good sense regarding the love of literature. Okay?
But what I'm suggesting is that you are the professionals. You are the ones that really should be right there on the cutting edge with the research, telling us that this doesn't work.
Well, I think you heard, it was my point to talk about things that hadn't been presented before, and you did hear other folks talk about that, how important that was for it to happen in their classrooms.
The way our system is set up in terms of the hierarchy with administration, et cetera, that the professionals, the teachers are the professionals.
Mm-hmm.
What is it in the system that prevents that professionalism?
Oftentimes, I think it's because that teachers are called professionals, but we are called upon to do whatever it is the process comes out with. And we're rarely, if ever, consulted about what the process ought to be in the beginning. And one of the comments that we made to one another was that the parents and the teachers are the people that you're hearing last tonight, when we're the folks who are closest to the actual process of reading instruction. So I think one of the answers to that first concern is that teachers do want to be included in in the making of the decisions, but we rarely are. As I started out by saying, everything that I do in my classroom is a result of a decision that's made somewhere else. One of these days, I hope, while I'm still a teacher, instead of having the decision or the program advisory or whatever else it is handed out into the world, someone comes to my room and talks to my colleagues and I in my lunchroom, and with the parents who are also there helping us out at school, and says, how could we make reading instruction better? And talk to us in the laboratory, where we're trying to do our very level best. And then if that's how the process is developed, and some of that is in the Reading Task Force report, but it's generally not a practice. Where I come from, what we're supposed to do in our classroom is handed down. And we are told that we will do it or not be included. Let me get to the other point about the staff development.
Yeah, how do we make staff development effective?
I think it's the same answer.
Empowered?
Well, I don't need to be empowered. I just want to be asked my opinion about what works in my classroom.
But generally, if you're not being asked your opinion, then you are not vested with power on that.
That would be true.
So how do we create this? Do we do we provide the freedom for you to go out and identify the kind of staff development that you want to take?
I think it would be really useful for sites and school boards and school districts and parents to be the ones who look and decide what kind of staff development ought to be really meaningful. And then when that happens, I think there would be much more likelihood that everyone would be on the same page in terms of being able to execute it. And I think maybe Mary wants to say something.
Well, I have to try to answer both questions at the same time. First of all, we've been very process-oriented, whether it be from the school improvement program or what to do, and instead of results-oriented. And we're only lately kind of getting around to everybody looking or starting to look at results. When you only deal with process, there's not a whole lot of need to spend a lot of time on research either, I might add, because you get blamed, well, you're not doing the process right. So that's number one, instead of looking at the process itself. I think in terms of staff development, that what we really, I think the best it would be, such as Dave Gordon described, where you have something that you need to tackle as a district, that in fact it is done in the district, and that you have the resources come to you. And I think my concern is a dearth of resources, quite frankly, as I indicated before. And I think whoever can find and identify the best resource, whether it be the teacher or the principal or the administrator, as long as the consensus is, as long as there's a consensus, this is what we need, I'm willing to let anybody find it and bring it and bring it in. Some staff development is very personalized, is really just appropriate for that person, is not necessarily built around, as I think in this case it should be, school goals or district goals, and then I think it's up to the individual.
If I might ask one more question about this staff development issue, because having been on a school board and coming from a family of educators and always been around this discussion, I know that there has been some feeling that staff development many times is not really worth the investment. It's ineffective.
Right.
Would a better model be something that we like to do for students, is to develop an individual plan, professional plan for a teacher, that be the relationship that the teacher has with the administrator or with a peer group, to develop an individual plan that, not or one size does not fit all in a school district. And so each teacher's individual needs in terms of staff development, in terms of filling the voids, be addressed in a very individualized way, rather than saying district-wide, which we did in the school district where I served on the board. This year we're going to be doing math, and so it's math this year. Well, maybe the math teachers really don't need math. Maybe they need something else. Maybe they need a sabbatical. I don't know. But this kind of one-size-fits-all that I still kind of hear, let's tackle this problem for the school district, when if we're really trying to build professionalism and have teachers that will say, this is the way, I have been to class, I have read the research in this, is that a better model? Because I'm not convinced we're still going to get to where we need to be if we, unless I hear from you that that's really the best model.
Well, it reminds me an awful lot of the process that teachers have to go through anyway in order to get their credential renewed. There's an individual plan of activities that they have to take anyway in conjunction and consultation with their principal. So to some degree, that vehicle is already there. I think, though, in order to affect the kind of change that I heard parents and teachers here talking about tonight, it really has to be more of a team approach, something that will fit where the methodology and the research and the teachers and the parents and the administrators all come together, and either as Dave did it district-wide or in school site by school site, because when we're all working together with our students, it all seems to come out so much better than when we're responding to yet another report, even if it's a good one.
Okay. Very good questions. Mr. Murray.
Ms. Kenmotsu?
Kenmotsu.
And also to Ms. Bergen. What would you think of teachers and administrators being held responsible for the success of their students?
To a great degree, they are being held responsible for their own students. Parents are parents are becoming much more likely to and participating in their kids' education and coming in as an individual teacher when things are not going right. If we have a good parent-teacher relationship and we're communicating and we're being professionals as partners, then that accountability piece is already there. But I think you're talking about something else, aren't you?
Yes, you're being measured based on your success in the product that you're producing.
And who would decide what the measurement tool would be?
I don't know.
That's sort of where things sort of fall apart.
Right.
So what do you?
And are you accountable?
So that you don't
following
think
your
that teachers should be
process?
held responsible for the outcome of their students?
I haven't been shown a model yet that's convinced me it would be a valid and that the assessment would be free.
So as
from
of now,
stuff.
you do not think it's a good idea? Yes, Mary.
Well, I was going to say the problem is that we are, let's say that you are, as a teacher, required to follow a particular process. And you know that you are evaluated on, did you follow that process? Yes or no? And yet, in the process, however, is faulty.
So you don't
So
think
where-
they ought
where
to
do-
be held responsible?
I think they ought to be held responsible if they're also,
But under the present circumstance, you don't think they ought to be held responsible?
well, I mean, if I can dictate if I as a teacher can dictate the process that gets me to the result, yes, but if I have to deal with another process,
How about the
then no.
administrator, like the principal, being held responsible for the success of the students in that school?
If you held the principal responsible for what happened in the school, and the school didn't perform well, and you got rid of the principal, and you got another principal, and the school still didn't do well, did it work? I mean, when you look at school districts that are in trouble where there are lots of low-performing schools, and they have administrators, they have superintendents, and the superintendents are supposed to be held accountable for what happens in that school district, and the school district continues not to perform well.
Well, who should be held responsible? Legislators?
Why do we always get half of a
I don't-
question here? If you have the same model and you replace the principal and things changed, would you say that it worked?
Yeah, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And would you assume then perhaps that if you got 2 in a row that were bad, that might be the problem too? Why are we going through all this? We get bound up in union problems because we can't assess whether teachers are doing a good job or not. It's nonsense.